Welcome friends, enemies, and everyone in between to my channel, The Masked Mormon.
Why you wearing a mask? Were you burned by acid or something like that?
Oh no, it's just they're terribly comfortable. I think everyone will be wearing them in the future.
If you're returning, I am so glad you could come back. If this is your first time here, I am a Mormon who used to believe in the truth claims of the Mormon Church. I did it all. I was baptized, went on a mission, got married in the temple. I was in it to win it. Now, I explore some of the implications of Mormon doctrine, theology, and culture, and talk about it on the internet with you fine viewers. Today is a very special episode of The Masked Mormon. I have my first guest. I would like to introduce to you my wife, the Masked Mistress.
Hello.
Masked Mistress, internet people, the Masked Mistress. I am so glad you could come on.
Thanks for having me.
We have been married for 16, 17, 18,
Something.
a long, long time. Something like that, right?
Something like that.
And so, I'm so glad you could come on.
Thank you.
I guess let's kind of get into it.
Okay.
Is there anything you'd like to start out with? I know I didn't do much of an introduction, but anything you'd like to start off with?
Nope.
Nope. Okay.
I didn't include that.
Are you nervous or anything?
No, but I do better at answering questions than just talking to the internet people.
All right. Well, again, thanks for coming on and doing this. Hopefully y'all enjoy kind of what we have to share here today. It's a little bit different than what I normally do. I have some questions that I'll kind of go over with her. The impetus for this kind of came when we were on a road trip, and I just started asking her like what her experiences were as I went through my own faith transition, and it's like, would you like to come on my channel? And you said yes.
Well, you had to bribe me.
How did I have to bribe you?
I'm not sharing. But there was bribery involved.
Okay. I'm not beyond that from time to time.
That is true.
Well, Masked Mistress, I guess to start out, tell us a little bit about your Mormon background, your parents growing up, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. I was born and raised in Texas, around the outskirts of Houston. And my parents were raised RLDS, that's Reorganized Latter-day Saint, now known as the Community of Christ. So they were raised, believing in the Book of Mormon and believing in Joseph Smith and a lot of the same things as the Mormon Church. So at some point in the, early to mid 80s, I think, that church started to going through some transitions and was becoming more mainstream Christian, and so my parents didn't feel like it was in line with their beliefs anymore, and so they kind of went out looking more or less for another church that would fit their beliefs. And once you have a belief in Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon, there's not really any other place to go but the Mormon Church. So kind of over a period of time, it was my mom and my dad, and then his kind of parents and siblings and kind of their extended family took the discussions over like a 6-month period every Thursday night, and there were like 11 or 12 people all in these group discussions, so like a missionary's dream. And then over the course of time, they all got baptized, and so I was 3 or 4 around that time, and then about a year after that, when I was 4 or 5, we got sealed in the Dallas temple. So I have memories of going to the RLDS church with my parents. We still went occasionally with my grandparents. We went to the church where my parents were married. So there's just a lot of history and like sentiment wrapped up in that as well. There was some, some kind of family hostility between my dad's family and my mom's family. So I saw what it was like to leave one religion and kind of be shunned a little bit. Not a ton, but it was there.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like early family history. So from the time of 5 until forever, so we were Mormons, and so I went to primary, young women's, did all the things. My dad was fairly strict, and that kind of goes in line with the Mormon doctrine. Like, you have set laws, set things. The prophet says do it, you do it. Family home evening. I mean, it was just very structured and strict, and we for sure checked all the boxes. And I mean, you kind of throw this combo of me, the oldest, so kind of the things that surround an oldest child, perfection and pleasing, and I fit right into that, plus a father on top of that who was very family oriented but very strict, and the Mormon church, which is very structured and strict. And I mean, it was kind of this perfect storm of, I knew nothing else. It was very naive, and I thought that's how the world was. It was Mormons versus everyone. I had some wonderful spiritual growth experiences, at the time thought was testimony building, but were significant to me. They were still important and wonderful, especially surrounding my mother and having to go through some kind of awkward growing up times with, my mom had early onset Alzheimer's, so I had to kind of grow up quickly in kind of a leadership, take care of my family, so those kinds of burdens. And then my father always talked about a mission. Not so much us going on a mission per se, I mean, kind of, but he had 4 daughters. He never got to go on a mission. He was almost always the ward mission leader. So it was just very important to him, and he had some wonderful missionary experiences. So, I had that kind of ingrained in me that I should go, partly for myself, if not, to please my dad. This is kind of fulfilling his dream. So I did. I went on a mission at 21. I was called to the Salt Lake City South Mission, so that's not like Temple Square or anything. It's just like the south of the valley. And Spanish speaking, which was terrifying. Because I always thought I was terrible at languages, which I still believe. But it was a challenge. It was a growth thing for me. So that, and then BYU was all in there, and then that's kind of where our lives converged.
So kind of going back to your dad, so you mentioned he had a belief in the Book of Mormon already, and you kind of briefly mentioned that family was super important to him. So what was the draw from RLDS to LDS besides the Book of Mormon and some of the changes that were going on?
Right. So his strongest belief in, like, religion, not religion, whatever, is family. So his major thing was the temple, like getting sealed in the temple, and having your family together forever. That was his big draw. I think for a time in the 80s and 90s there was this like no empty chairs in heaven, and so that really struck a chord with him, and that was really important to him, to always have your family around you. So it was great having the Book of Mormon and prophets and all of that kind of supported that, but that was his main thing.
Okay. And what was your church experience like? So you went to primary, young women's, and stuff like that. But what was it like? You said you didn't know really anything different, but
Right.
Did you enjoy it? Did you believe it? Did you kind of push against any of the stuff like that?
Yeah, didn't know that there was a possibility of pushing against. So I just didn't know that there was an other. Like, we went to church, period. I didn't think otherwise. I didn't think of not going to church. I did enjoy, it was pressure, but I had great friends. We had a great social structure in church. I think it made high school and outside of church hard because I didn't know how to navigate those waters very well, and I wasn't given any support beyond, like, you don't do the bad things, and you try and convert everybody, and you stay away from the bad people. It was just very basic, right? But I did. I enjoyed it. I went to girls' camp all the time. Back then there was EFY. I think it's FSY now. And, you know, I had a boyfriend every summer from FSY. So that was very significant to me.
You mean other guys besides me?
There was a whole life before you, honey.
You had all this game, and I had none.
I know. You're still bitter.
I
can't get
am.
him to get past that. So it was good. It was, when I was in it and I didn't have to think about the outside world, it was great. I wanted to go to BYU because to me that was like the Mormon utopia. A whole world full of just Mormons and everyone who believes the same as you. It was just, I mean, that's who wouldn't have that fantasy, not just in Mormondom, but anywhere you would want to go to be surrounded by this utopia of beliefs. And so that was all good. Is that all you asked me?
Yeah. So you would say that you were invested, right?
Yeah, and yeah, but I do remember just looking back now, not at the time, I just didn't know that there was another option. Because of the way my dad structured our lives, there was no way to know that there was another option. So to answer your question, I was invested. It was a wonderful experience, but I also didn't know. I didn't ever have the choice.
Okay.
So it wasn't even. I didn't know if there was anything to push against. There just was nothing else. That's just what it was.
Did you read the Book of Mormon or the scriptures? Did you have like a converting experience at all when you were growing up?
Definitely. I was very much like my dad in checking the box. You were told to read the Book of Mormon, you read the Book of Mormon. You were told to go to seminary, that's what you did because that's what made you a good Mormon. So in that sense, I was perfect. Kind of a downside of that we have discussed, and we might discuss for seminary. So I went to 4 years of seminary, and in Texas, it was very early seminary because school started early. So seminary started at 5:45 in the morning. And so I was getting up at 4 a.m. and I was taking AP and honors classes. I was in multiple sports. So I was getting consistently 4 and 5 hours of sleep during my formative years. And I've told you this, but there were several days where when I did have my license eventually, I was driving and I was the only one in our community driving. So I was picking up 4 and 5 kids at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would fall asleep at the wheel in the neighborhood.
Super dangerous.
That's so scary. But but I was invested in being perfect, in a perfect attendance at seminary, in doing all the lessons and doing all the reading, and I didn't have the concept of, okay, I just can't get to it. Some of the things have to be dropped off the list. It was do everything or feel guilty. If you don't do everything, you're not enough, and you need to repent for that. And so prayers every night and scriptures all the time, and just everything.
For sure, Mormonism in the 80s and 90s was a lot different than it is even now. As far as being very performative and very...
Yeah, it was intense. It was kind of all encompassing.
Yeah, which I guess serves to kind of give you a strong community and a strong foundation as far as like, this is what you do, this is how you live. But it can definitely do unhealthy things like get a teenager up at 4 in the morning,
right?
Driving when they shouldn't be. Did you ever have any like uncomfortable run-ins with the church, like bishops' interviews or anything like that were kind of problematic?
None. I think, if anything, it was just bishops not understanding. Like I wasn't abused or taken advantage of or anything like that, but if there were any problems or concerns that I didn't know the difference between handling myself or going to the bishop, because it was, what is it, you're compelled to confess, or
yeah.
I just was a confessor, right? You confess your sins, and that's how you relieve your burden. so I'm sure I was going to the bishop more than necessary, and for things that just, and if I had an emotional question or a problem that I just didn't understand, they just didn't know what to do with me. So I probably got some answers to questions that weren't very helpful. But I know we together had a not good bishop
we'll
experience.
Get that in a little bit, yeah.
You're just talking about before.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you chose to go to BYU.
And I got accepted to BYU. That's significant.
Yeah. Because BYU has like what, an acceptance rate of like 60% or something like that. Was it? Do you think it was harder to get in when we were kind of?
I don't know, because I mean I made straight A's, but I was just kind of average in every other sense. I don't know that I stuck out so much, but.
And I know you had a really rough transition into college, because you talked about your friend kind of helping you kind of start enjoying life, right?
Right. I didn't know that there was anything else, and just come to find out that I had worked hard my whole, school didn't come easy, but I was driven to do it well. So it took me a lot of time to do homework, to do things, and I didn't have, my parents told me to do things well, but I didn't have necessarily the support to, I felt alone at 3 a.m. doing homework. You feel alone.
Yeah.
But
Your transition to BYU,
so I had, my roommate just had to kind of teach me how to study effectively. That was the whole point of that, is that, I had gotten all these good grades and done all this hard work, but I wasn't efficient at it. I didn't gain as much as I needed to for college. And then the biggest part was I had never been on my own, in the sense of I had never made my own choices before. My dad had made all my choices for me, and so it was this whole I can make my own choices. I don't have to call my dad to see if that is okay. And this friend, my roommate, was just, she was the youngest child. She was accustomed to all of that, and a different family structure and a different life. Not a bad influence. She was very much
she kind of helped you come out of your shell quite a bit.
Yeah.
It seemed like, because it seemed like she kind of had to teach you how to become a person.
Yeah, in probably many ways, socially and confidence. And the biggest thing I remember is just having this concept that I could make my own decisions. Was new.
So did you date a lot? What was that like?
I did. We had a great ward, a whole new boys, a whole new crop of boys. So there were a lot of boys. We had a good group that we did, dances and all the school activities. I went on dates a lot that first semester, but I don't think I had a boyfriend. It was the second semester where I got into the phys ed program. No, that's not right. I was doing
sophomore
I
year,
know I was doing my pre stuff.
All your generals.
Preliminaries.
Yeah.
Well, not the generals. It was the preliminaries to apply to
Okay.
the phys ed program. And so to do that, I started working. I had my first college job, and it was, I don't know what it is with us and early morning addiction to early morning whatever, but I had this, was it 4 to 8? A 4 to 8 custodial job at the library. That's just that's how it worked. That's the job I got. And so I met this guy on our shift, and he and I...
Not me.
Not you. Anyway, so I met this guy on our shift, and we started dating, and it was very much like your typical Mormon story. Within 2 weeks we were dating, and within a few weeks after that we were engaged, talking about getting married. I mean, it was insane, right? And so we were just tossing out all these things. He hadn't proposed. I didn't have a ring, but somehow all of a sudden we were getting married, and it was going to be in like August. It was nuts. But so it was just like that whirlwind whatever, and for some reason I put on the brakes and I was like, look, I can't, something isn't right. Not that you're not the right person, but this is too fast. Like, this isn't, I'm not comfortable with fast, and I need to build more trust.
Your typical BYU romance, it goes really quick. You'll go from meeting a person to dating them to
from stranger to like
engaged
married.
within 3 months. It's not an unusual thing.
Yeah, and from strangers to married, it could be 6 months at the shortest, but at the most 9 months to a year.
Yeah. So, like, by the time somebody's married, if you just were to roll back the calendar to a year before, they wouldn't have even met yet.
Right.
And so the pressure there is really hard because, at BYU there's a really strict honor code, that kind of controls, a lot of aspects of a person's life, including, being intimate with people.
Physical intimacy.
And so the only way you have these hormonal 20-somethings and late teens, for them to kind of express that is to get married. And then you have a lot of the, just the church doctrine around family that really puts the pressure on as well. So you end up with a lot of very early engagements. In fact, there was one woman in one of our wards, she was engaged like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, that's right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So it was, so you kind of put all of those into the pot, and you kind of just have this perfect storm of kids getting married. And we talked about this, like, I didn't have any ambitions. I was never taught to have ambitions for my life outside of getting married. Like, I wanted to get my phys ed degree, but it was to be the kid's soccer mom. It was to be, it wasn't to have a career or a job. It was to have a fallback in case your husband passed away. You have this fallback. It just wasn't anything else.
So I guess I was going to ask that a little bit later, but so what was it like being a woman as a Mormon? Can early
you
on.
Break that down into a smaller question. That's kind of a big question.
So as an early college woman, what was kind of involved with that, and we'll kind of pick that question up as well later on. But like, as coming in from high school into college, like you said, you didn't have a lot of ambitions. Like, what were you taught to have ambitions? Were you?
Well, Dad always said to go to college. He wanted us to get he went to college, Mom went to college. That wasn't a new thing for our family. But he said specifically, like, you're never going to be in a more concentrated area to find somebody with your own beliefs. So it wasn't ever like, it was never said, put your degree on hold, or you're going to college for what people called your MRS degree. You're just going there to get married, which many people did, but that's not what my dad said. But we never had a discussion of, at least not that I remember, or not very often, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Like, what career do you want? What do you want to do? Like, that was never developed. It was, and I think that was probably also the culture, not just in Mormonism, but, your parents wanted you to go to college because you got paid more if you went to college and you got your degree, but you didn't really ever go beyond that. It wasn't necessarily the specifics of that, or what are you going to do, or how does that translate into a job, or whatever. So part of that, I think, is the time period. And then, of course, the other part in Mormonism was just you got educated so that you could be a good mom. You were training still to be a mother. It wasn't ever like you should have kids because family is important, but also your education and you as a person, an individual person, is important. That was not as much there.
So the main task for you was to be a mother, to be a wife.
Yeah, I mean, if you boil it down, yeah. That.
So, I guess, how did you meet the Masked Mormon? Any thoughts on
Now
that?
this is a good story, and we have to tell this together because that's how we do it best. We haven't told it in a while.
That's true.
But for a while, we did have kind of this great put it together. Okay. So it was our sophomore year at BYU, and we happened to be in the same ward, which at BYU was just kind of a cluster of on-campus apartments. Ours was like 3 buildings,
Two or
two
three
girls,
buildings.
and
Then,
three-
yeah.
So we were neighbors, basically, obviously not in the same building, but just like across the sidewalk neighbors.
Yeah, there was a friend from freshman year who lived in her apartment, and so I would sometimes pop over to visit her. And
Yes, well, and a lot of your friends from freshman year were there. I was alone. I was just kind of.
I was the only guy because I decided not to go on a mission.
Right, but you've told that story.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess it plays in a little bit. But anyway, so we technically saw each other met at, at an FHE. You know, every Sunday night they'd have FHE or devotional or whatever. And so I saw him, and he wore really bright Sunday shirts, button-up shirts. So that catches your attention.
I never caught the memo that I was only supposed to wear white shirts. So I would wear
But there's a bright blue,
purple,
red
kind of shirts and stuff like that.
So that was he stuck out in that sense. He was developed. He's very handsome. Yeah, so all these things. So that just catches your eye because it's different, right? But he was very confident and carried himself very confidently. So that made him seem unapproachable to me. Because I wasn't as forward as all that, and so
if only she was in my head, she would realize how unconfident I actually was.
Right, but what he portrayed was this confidence and really well put together. So I just said, oh well, he's cute, but like he'll just be eye candy, right? Nothing will happen with that. And then I think we ended up being in the same FHE group, and we did meet each other over at dinner. Was there much that came of that?
No,
It was just
we
again.
didn't really talk to each other. It was most like I saw you sitting across the table, and that's about it.
Happened to recognize. Okay. And then, what was it?
It was the phys ed program.
Okay, so then I was in part of the physical education program, and I needed to be physically fit. Like I had always been fit and on teams and everything, but oddly enough, I had never been introduced to like a weight room and how to do that daily, and so those are all very new to me. And clearly, based on how he looked, I knew he was familiar with the gym. So I don't remember exactly, but what it boiled down to was we had enough connections that I came up to you and said, hey, I'm in this program and I really need to know this stuff better. Could you kind of show me around the gym and help me figure this out?
Yeah, so I started helping her out in the gym and working out with her, and I'm one of those people that I can get attached and become attracted to and fall in love very easily. And I knew this about myself, and I was like, okay, Masked Mormon, you are not gonna do she just wants to learn how to work out, she just wants to whatever. But we had a very easy communication style. We talked well together, we connected well, and so
I would say I'm very similar to that as well. Can fall in love very easily, very attracted, very boy crazy. But the thing for me was I had a boyfriend at the time, and a very serious boyfriend. Don't make faces. So it wasn't that I wasn't attracted. It was that I was in this other relationship, and it was going places. So that's just.
Yeah, and so while we were working out, like. I realized I was starting to develop feelings for her, and I just kind of had this sinking feeling. I was like, oh no. And so I realized, like, okay, she has a boyfriend. Granted, he was getting ready to go on a mission.
Sure.
So, do you really have a boyfriend if he's getting ready to go on a mission? And I wasn't going to go on a mission. And
Oh, that's part of our story that was important.
yeah,
That was even before we started working out.
it was either before or right around the same time,
Okay.
because we started talking to each other. Like every Sunday, there'd be kind of a get together where everybody would come together. And I remember one evening we started
so it wasn't
talking.
out of the blue that I asked
Yeah.
you. But yeah, okay, that's what really kind of kicked the whole thing off. Was Masked Mormon had decided not to go on a mission, and I knew that, and we were having some kind of conversation around that. And kind of contrary to everything I've shared about growing up, from all of that, I would have normally judged and done everything that every other girl had ever done. But in that moment, I was like, you know what? If that's what works for you, I don't care. Like, that's your choice, and that doesn't bother me. That doesn't change anything. I think, did you remember the specific wording?
I don't remember the specific wording, but I do remember, because every time I would talk to a woman at BYU, the questions were, what's your major, where are you from, when are you going to go on a mission? Every time. And I was not going to go. Like,
You were fairly recent convert.
I was a really recent convert, yeah. And so I decided it's not for me. And that would turn all the women away. They'd be like, well, you'd make such a great missionary, Masked Mormon. And it's like, well, if it's so important to you, why don't you go?
Well, and it was also kind of closed down, not just the immediate conversation, but then...
Anything further, yeah.
Yeah.
I was essentially an untouchable.
Yeah.
And so when she said something along the lines of, like, I respect that decision not to go on a mission. And it was jarring, I remember, because I was like, oh, she's okay with this? And that seemed to open the door for just being...
Even just a further friendship at the very least. And then we got to know each other it was still just kind of in passing, and then it was the gym, and
we started spending just more time together.
Yeah.
And I knew I was in love with her long before she did, and I did like the common guy thing, it's like, no, we're just friends, and it was...
And I was very much battling my internal feelings. Because I seriously loved this other guy that I was dating, but I knew that we were close and we were developing a friendship, and I trusted that, and that was very important for me. I knew in any kind of long-term friendship or relationship is that I had to have an unconditional trust of the person. So that's what was developing. And we were really good friends for...
about a year.
Yeah.
And there would be these moments where something would happen where I'd think, oh, we're about to change. Like, the status of our relationship about to change. Like, she would play with my hands or something like that, or we would have this, really deep conversation or something like that, and then almost immediately it would cool off.
Because I realized what I was doing or whatever. So,
and I realized, I was kind of whittling my college experience away with this woman who just wanted to be friends, and we had this experience one summer where we were going to get together with some other friends.
Yeah.
I was living in New Mexico, I offered to come to Texas to pick her up. And while I was en route, I had this mental image of all these road trip movies, of something happens on road trips. Well, her dad was sitting her down and saying, look, Masked Mistress, just friends, don't travel 1,000 miles in the wrong direction to pick up another just friend to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And it dawned on her that, I had been...
He's been lying to me this whole time. He said we were just friends, but he was lying. He likes me, and this will not do.
So it made for a very awkward trip.
And the kibosh.
Yeah.
It was.
And so by that time I was like, okay, she's made it very clear. I just need to move on. And so that year...
that semester.
Yeah, that semester.
So we got back to BYU. Again, kind of ended up in the same apartment complex. Mm-hmm. So very close.
And we'd hang out still.
Yeah, which I still wanted. I still wanted that friendship, but I just didn't want more. at that time. And by this point, you know, this other guy is kind of out of the picture, and now as we're getting into this really close friendship, and he starts kind of dating these other girls, was starting to realize, hey, I am actually starting to fall in love with this guy, but now I'm not moving forward on it because I was getting scared, because I knew that we had this strong enough friendship and relationship that if we started dating, we would get married, and I wasn't ready to get married. We had also at that point talked about both going on missions.
Well, I decided to go on a mission because she was going to go on a mission, and I was like, okay, look, God,
Fine.
let's cut a deal here.
That's right. I forgot about that. He made a deal with God for me. Aw. That's right. So anyway, so there was this
agency be damned, right?
Anyway, so there was this back and forth, and then finally by the end of that semester, we'd had some ups and downs. Let's just cut to the chase. Anyway, so by the beginning of the next semester,
So she broke us up with. I was dating this girl, and she broke us up twice because she lived next to this woman, and would see me going over to her apartment. And
are you noticing a trend? You bring out all these parts of my personality that I just didn't even know existed. I became this evil...
I made you a jealous person. I destroyed your salvation. Am I just a bad influence on you?
Influence. I mean, we realized that a long time ago. But, yeah. So, by the beginning of that next semester, we have a really wonderful starting date experience.
But the problem was, she had reinforced so much that we're just friends that...
To break that down and reverse it took a little bit of time.
It was really awkward. So my family lives in Las Vegas, and she suggested that we go down to Las Vegas for one of the holidays we had.
Martin Luther King Day,
yeah.
January, yeah.
And on the trip down, she reaches over and starts holding my hand.
That's so nice.
But in my mind, we're just friends. And so here I am, just like...
stiff as a board. I've
Stiff as a board.
never seen somebody drive a car.
I'm driving the car,
so stiffly.
and I'm like, okay, maybe it's like a T-Rex. If I move, she's going to know what's going on and stop holding my hand. And so, we were chatting and stuff like that, but in my mind, it's like, what's going on? This does not compute. And we had this whirlwind of a kind of a day-long, 2-day date or something.
Like a 48-hour date that just didn't end.
Yeah, and it kind of at the end of it, she... it's at the end of the evening, of course, because we're Mormon, there's only so far we can go, but she's looking up at me, giving me very obviously, kiss me face. But in my mind, I'm like, I see kiss me face, but we're just friends. There's kiss me face, but we're just friends. And just this back and forth. And she says, we were waiting around for an hour. It's like, no, we weren't. It wasn't that long.
Totally felt like an hour. It felt like forever.
Might have been forever, but that's your fault.
I know.
But we did kiss.
It's a very good kiss.
And
very
it was
excellent first kiss.
And that's kind of the start. And I guess where we went from there. And then we started dating. We had about 9 months of dating, and then we both went on missions.
Thankfully, not at the MTC at the same time. About, what was it, like 6 weeks apart or something? Yeah. Wrote, Masked Mormon was more diligent at it than I was.
I was. True. It was.
But it was significant because it wasn't like one of us just waiting for the other. We went through this experience. I always felt together. We were experiencing the same thing and the hardships at the same time. So it still continued to help grow our relationship, which I really liked. And then I got home about 6 months before he did, and was probably a good thing because I was a complete mess. You hear about people readjusting from their missions.
She's super awkward.
Oh my gosh, I was one. It was so bizarre. It felt like, how would you describe, like being in somebody else's body? Like I just couldn't move myself in the right way. The Masked Mormon and I we danced all the time. We loved dancing. And I came home and I couldn't even do the beat anymore, like side shuffle. It was bad. So good that I got to come home first and readjust to everything.
So my coming home was a little bit different. Somehow the messaging didn't get to my parents that I was coming home. So nobody was at the airport. She didn't want to be there because she wanted, time with I could have time for my family.
Trying to be respectful of his family.
Because they're not members or anything like that. And so yeah, I came home to the airport. Nobody was there. I took a taxi cab back to my house. When my brothers got home from school, and he's like, "Oh, you're home now?"
Right.
But she came
like 3 days later.
3 days later.
Yeah.
And I knew I was going to marry her, but I wasn't expecting to propose for a while. But I decided, let's go look at rings and just see kind of, because we had talked about everything, and so I kind of knew what she wanted in a ring. And I found something, and I was like, I had saved up for it, like I had money set aside specifically for that. And
unbeknownst to me.
So I bought it, and then it was going to be ready the day she got there, so on a Saturday. Mm-hmm. And so I had my mom take her for a manicure, pedicure. We hadn't seen each other in 2 years.
Right, let me lay this out for you. First of all, I love the Masked Mormon's mother, but we came from very different worlds, and it was difficult for us to communicate. So it was just awkward. Not bad, just awkward. And so here I am in love with this man, and I haven't seen him in 2 years. We have this glorious reunion at the airport, and the first place he takes me is we went to a salon to get our nails done, and drops me off with his mother. And so,
but I had to go pick up the ring. I wasn't gonna. I was about to tell her
now, but that I was horrified at the time. I was like, what?
But after that, we had another kind of whirlwind date.
Yeah, we almost kind of relived our first.
Yeah, our first date was pretty much a repeat.
Yeah.
And then that evening, I proposed to her, and she's like, "I can't believe I'm engaged now." So is that a yes?
But it was kind of cool because the next day we went to. He's been home for 4 days, right? So that it was the first Sunday back, and you do a report to the high council or something, right? And this missionary, this just home missionary, walks in with
a fiance.
And they're like,
"Elder, have you been released yet?"
Have you gotten released? So that was kind of funny.
Yeah. So what was it like?
We were married 3 months later after
3 months, yeah.
So the part of that we always liked about our story is that from the moment we met till when we got married was
4 years.
4 years, which is very much outside the norm of Mormondom.
Yeah.
Okay,
so what was it like getting married? Like, so you had a temple experience when you went on your mission, and then we got married. What was that day like?
So I have heard from other people, this wasn't my experience, but that they often, women often, they get their endowment the day before, and then they get married the next day, sealed the next day, so they don't ever have this experience to really appreciate the temple and have this relationship to the temple, and the endowment doesn't really mean much to them because they're just doing it to get to the next step. So here I've had 2 years of the temple, so I had a really beautiful relationship with the temple. I couldn't say I really understood a lot of it. We were always told there's these deeper meanings and look for the symbolism, but I couldn't for the life of me figure any of that out. When we went through the temple, is it okay to talk about some of how it was different back then?
Yeah.
So when we went through the temple, over the past 40 years, it's changed quite a bit. And when we went through, we had to be naked in the initiatory. And so you had a little tent thing on, but it was awkward that you've been told to be super modest your whole life, and then the first thing you do when you get in the temple is told to take all your clothes off. Thankfully, kind of again different than I would have expected is my dad told me that. He actually told me that before we went in, because he was like, look, there's no reason you shouldn't know what to expect. So I very much appreciated that. It didn't help, but at least it didn't.
You weren't. It wasn't dropped on you unexpectedly.
Right. So it was still awkward. So I don't remember anything of the initiatory except the fact that I was just naked the whole time. But as I've gone back and through life experiences, I really liked. There was some beautiful language in the initiatory.
So in the endowment, so for the endowment, it's another one of the ordinances in the temple. You're kind of in this theater, you're watching this movie that kind of is about the creation and stuff like that, and there's certain covenants a person makes for that. But there can be, sometimes the differences between men and women can be very stark in there as well. Mm-hmm. Did you have any kind of did you feel kind of awkward about some of the things that were in the temple, especially as it regards to you as a woman?
Not initially, because especially the first time I was going through, my helper was my mom, who was handicapped, which was probably not the best choice. So I really didn't have a guide the first time. So probably similar to anybody else's first time. It's just a blur. Honestly, I don't think I thought about it until we were married and we started discussing it. That I couldn't do anything without your permission, and like I had been raised that way, and we had kind of to get through our relationship of, you aren't in charge of me, I'm not beneath you. That was very important to you, that it not be that way, but I had been raised that way, so we had to kind of figure that out.
Yeah, we kind of ran into some difficulties early in our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
Where she had certain expectations kind of imposed on her by, just a certain patriarchal order. Like, I was supposed to be in charge of this. I was supposed to kind of tell you what to do, right?
Initiate. I always kind of felt as like you should be the initiator and the is it impetus, or the one who just kind of made everything happen. And I would support you in that.
And I always saw it as like I was the one who's supposed to be in charge of everything, and I always kind of pushed back against that. And like, it's like, if we're supposed to be equals, if we're supposed to be partners, it shouldn't be that I'm in charge of her. And so,
but isn't that so? That always struck me as so, like, how many Mormon relationships are like that? Because most other Mormon guys were raised to feel that way, to feel the exact of, I am in charge. Not necessarily meant to put down their wife, but they are raised in with this pressure of, I'm in charge and I have to be the one to tell my wife what to do. And so you were very much an anomaly in that sense.
Yeah. So kind of going back, so what was your wedding day like?
I want to say how we prepped for our wedding, because that's very different from most people too.
Is.
Again, initiated by you, but I thought was brilliant is the Masked Mormon knew that, I don't know, would you have done this with any other wife, do you think? Or was it because was it Mormon girl? What is it?
Good girl syndrome.
Good girl syndrome. You knew I had that.
Yeah. Well, I knew that physical intimacy was going to be super important, like
probably to any relationship.
Yeah, but I was girl crazy. Like I knew about that I wanted to be physically intimate, since time immemorial.
Right, from the beginning.
And unfortunately, I could never express that. And but at the same time, I kind of knew that there was a lot that I didn't know.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the messaging around, things like porn and masturbation and stuff like that was so heavy. Like, I totally, I kind of avoided a lot of that. And so there was a lot that I didn't know, and I knew there was a lot that you didn't know.
And was uncomfortable with.
And so, as we were engaged, we read this book about...
and credit where credit is due. It was your suggestion. And I don't know if we might have had some conversations of, hey, this is going to happen, so what are we going to do about it? So it's a good experience for both of us. I just feel like you initiated a lot of that. And again, how often do you see that as the husband, whether from ignorance or not, of course he doesn't want his wife, of course he wants his wife to have a good experience, but he's so inexperienced and so unknowledgeable that he doesn't know how to do that. And so, but it was important to you that we both had.
But part of my nature is researching things
true.
and understanding things beforehand, and so we kind of used.
Yeah, I think we did. Did some of my family recommend a book?
Yeah.
Okay.
You borrowed a book from your sister.
Yeah, and then we ended up. Did we read it separately and discuss, or did we read? Yeah, I think that was something I had suggested.
Yeah.
That we read it separately because it comes across as porn to somebody who is just
who has no experience, and it's going into a lot of details.
Yeah.
And so we were already very physically.
Could you imagine, like, we get turned on by the book that's supposed to educate us, and then we, like, have sex before we're married because of the book that was trying to educate us about sex? Like, how ironic would that be?
And it goes to show just how kind of repressive,
that you get turned on by a sex education book.
Yeah.
I mean, it was beautiful, but it was. Yeah. There's just something wrong with it.
And it made for a great experience when we were married.
Yeah, well, and it explains some things. I mean, it's not going to erase all your fears or uncomfortable, but at least we had knowledge, information of what to work with.
Yeah.
And it did end up helping, I think.
Well, and that kind of reminds me of like this interview we had with that bishop.
Oh yeah, that.
So before we got married, there's always these interviews with the bishop, kind of to get you ready for going through the temple and stuff like that, and
And we had been careful, like we were. Can I say horny?
Sure.
Okay. We were super horny. I mean, I'm sure every Mormon couple is, because you're like 20-somethings and have been like sexually repressed your whole life, and like super sexually repressed your whole life.
Yeah.
And so, but we were careful. It was important to me.
We made out a lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
But it was probably more important to me than you, but you respected it. That I wanted to wait. You just supported that. I don't know that you wanted to.
I did not want to. Had she suggested we do something, I would have been like, yes. 100% consent.
For sure.
Enthusiastic consent. Let's do this.
Yeah. But the point being leading up to this is that we were very careful. We were like 100% squeaky clean, at least physically, maybe not mentally, but we might have envisioned a few things. But we were careful, totally good, leading up specifically to this bishop's interview.
And so we go into this bishop, and I don't know if it's because he ran into a lot of BYU kids that were kind of succumbing to their physical passions and stuff like that. But he proceeded to go through this list of, do you do this? Do you do this? Do you do this?
It was almost like he walked in and welcomed us and then sat down and
accused us of all this stuff.
Yeah.
And it was a super awkward. Like, we both felt terrible as we walked out.
Like guilty for stuff we hadn't even considered doing.
Yeah.
And especially when he went down the list and we said no at like the second one. Yes, we've made out, and then necking and petting and we were
whatever
like,
that is.
No, yeah, whatever that is. From here, but he kept going, and it's like, if we didn't.
And it was so accusatory, and so afterwards we're like, should we just go get a hotel and do this anyway? Since
we've already been accused of it, we already feel terrible about not doing it. Should we just go do it?
Yeah. We never talked to that bishop again. Like, it was an awful, like, throughout my church experience, all of my experiences with bishops were actually really good, except for this one guy, and it was terrible.
Yeah.
But what about, so our prep for marriage, and then the day we get to the temple. So since my family aren't members of the church, and we were going to get married in the temple, and this was before you had the
way before.
Yeah, so if you got married civilly first, you would have to wait a year before you went to the temple.
Right.
Now they don't have that. You can get married immediately, essentially.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. But since my family aren't members of the church, they weren't going to even come to our wedding, because if I have to sit outside and wait for you, if the marriage is happening inside,
right,
and I have to wait outside for you,
why come?
Why come?
And and I get that now. And we were getting married in Houston, so they were going to fly there just to, they were going to fly and be there to just not participate, basically. So
So our wedding day was awful.
well,
Like, so I'm
it was not, it was beautiful and awful for other people.
well, the day was awful. The night was awesome.
Yes.
But but the day was awful because
Parts of the day were awful.
I'm glad we got married.
Yes.
I regret getting married in the temple.
Correct.
And
Well, even after the temple was
Yeah.
not great either.
so we went to do a ring ceremony.
Yeah, okay, so we were trying to get the Masked Mormon's family involved because we knew we wanted to involve them somehow. So we wanted to do a ring ceremony. More, I guess, looking at it now, it was kind of intended to be a vow exchange. But we had no guidance in that. No, we didn't know who to ask or what questions to ask to make that better. And so in my mind it was, okay, well, let's have the bishop do it because that kind of makes it legit and feel like a ceremony or something. But what it ended up being was the bishop standing up and giving a talk and saying why the Masked Mormon's family and anybody else couldn't come to the sealing.
Yeah,
Like,
this is why you couldn't go into the temple.
yeah.
And it was terrible.
And we didn't do a vow exchange. Like, looking back, what we should have done, I mean, we should have done 100 things, but, you know, we wanted to be able to, so, like, in a real vow, like, I pledge myself, this is why I'm in love with you, whatever. Anyway, so that kind of tainted everything, and we didn't really have a reception because we were going,
Cruise.
we were going on a cruise the next day. So what our plan was is to have kind of a family party, get together, and then do our reception after. So honestly, like, your parents didn't even have a reception or a greeting line or anything that resembled anything.
Yeah.
I felt that. I felt the awkwardness. You felt it more poignantly, and you just knew. And I think even as soon as we could, we apologized. That was not the intent, but that I don't think your mom held that against us, but I know it hurt her.
Yeah. So what kind of Mormon messaging, I know we kind of touched on a little bit, did you bring into marriage? You know, there was like the gender roles that we kind of talked about a little bit. Anything else that you brought into marriage? You know, children, career, all that kind of stuff.
I didn't bring any children into our marriage.
No, but but like messaging around that kind of stuff. Because I know. So we waited to have children
Okay,
for about
I
3
thought
years,
that's where you
right?
were going. Okay, so it again in my mind, and the messaging was you get married and then you have kids. Like, I don't think I was intending to do a honeymoon baby or anything, but I definitely wanted to get started on kids sooner than you did.
Because I wanted to be married. Like, you know, all of a sudden, you know, it's no as far as sex goes. Now it's like, okay, now you can do this. Like, I wanted to experience marriage. I wanted to experience this whole new dimension to our relationship before you kind of throw in, you know, the...
Right, but my whole life was, you get to the next checklist thing. You turn 16 and you date, and you do the young woman thing, and you do the seminary graduation thing, and you go to BYU thing, and you know, so it was just the next thing on the checklist, and it didn't occur to me to wait. And so unfortunately for me, it just felt like waiting as opposed to really developing us. Now we did, but it made it harder, I think, because we weren't on the same page, or on the same page for the right reasons.
Yeah.
So that was an adjustment for sure.
So we went to church every week. We were involved. We had callings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, we were in it to win it, right? How, like, was there anything that kind of changed your level of belief during that time? You know, before I kind of threw a grenade into things. Like, how Mormon were you then? How Mormon did you think I was?
I don't think anything changed. I think it was all cruising and like life is beautiful and life is normal until in Indiana. Like, it didn't change immediately, but that was kind of the first big step. We were away from Utah. We were the furthest we'd ever been from family. So it was an adjustment and a change, right? But I don't remember anything sticking out.
Yeah.
Do you?
No.
No, it was just...
So what were the
business
indications
as
that I
usual.
was starting to question?
I don't know. I mostly remember Florida. Remind me of some of the stuff before then. I knew what you were going through now. I knew what you were questioning.
It was probably
now.
Florida that, yeah, really kind of, so yeah.
Well, certainly we were having conversations that were different than other people. So, I mean, those didn't ever alert me to anything wrong, but I knew we were trying to be more open and accepting, especially because we were outside of the Utah bubble. We knew before that we didn't want to live in Utah. We wanted to be in, the mission field. We didn't want to be in that bubble. It was beautiful and it was nice, but we didn't want to raise our kids there. I mean, I'm sure that's different than most people. I don't know why I felt so strongly. Was it more like we had friends that just couldn't hang out with us because they had family or something?
Yeah, like for us, because we weren't close to family, we had to have friends
To be our
family, but they would often hang out with their own families, and so we were kind of...
I was bitter about that.
We had to change the battery. So, this is going to be a little bit longer of a video, I guess.
You don't have to put that.
I probably
Because you're married.
will. Whatever.
Okay. Continue.
All right, so marriage as a Mormon, we were kind of going down the checklist. We were, filling callings. We had...
Well, and honestly, if you think about it, because we were so far away from family, we were kind of just figuring things out on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And so that probably played a big part in things, too. We kept in touch with our family, but they weren't next door. They weren't in the same city. We saw them maybe once a year, and they certainly weren't part of our daily active lives. So just kind of naturally, we were just kind of having to figure it out ourselves.
Yeah, so the church kind of had to be our family.
Yeah.
And we were very socially integrated into it. And it worked for us.
Mm-hmm. Especially in Indiana.
Yeah.
Because it was a college town. It wasn't so conservative or so liberal. But, you tend to have people who are intellectually inclined and more so than other places. And people our same age and our same time in life with kids the same age, so it just was it was a
perfect kind of time for us.
Yeah.
But then, like I've expressed in a previous video, it started kind of like I realized there wasn't a lot of depth, and so I was starting to...
I do think at that point it started becoming routine.
Yeah, it was very routine, and I started asking questions, and kind of small questions at first. Things like, how did Nephi get to the Americas? What route did he take? Because, there were certain implications in the Book of Mormon. I started asking kind of questions I thought were safe. Like Noah's Ark. There's not enough water on the planet, and so Mormonism kind of demands a literal reading of a lot of the Old Testament, including things like Noah's Ark or the Tower of Babel and things like that. And so it's like, okay, these are actual historical claims, and scientific claims even, but they don't really hold up. And so I started realizing that Mormonism was really kind of shallow and kind of didn't hold up to scrutiny.
And I don't know that you certainly didn't word it to me in that way. It was just, we were always having these interesting and just our regular discussions that we'd always had from day one. But they weren't ever dangerous. And I was in a time in my life when all my time was taken up with being a mother and I was learning some new skills and interacting, and just we were in just I didn't feel the need to question because I was totally content in my life. So that was where we were at. Of course, I mean, Florida was a big thing, but it probably started when my dad passed away.
Yeah,
don't you think?
probably. And then, like, so I was questioning before he came to Florida, and then it really kind of ramped up. Partly because, you know, the ward we were in was very, very different socially. It wasn't nearly as healthy and vibrant as the ward we came from.
This is once we came to Florida.
Yeah. And so it kind of really accelerated things, and like there just wasn't any, none of the vibrancy or whatever. And so, and then I was kind of at this point where, like, in some of the questions I was asking, I started listening to some podcasts, and because I was like, okay, if I can't get intellectually stimulated through Sunday school or through church, there's got to be other ways to do it, and so that kind of started leading me down some of these paths, I guess.
Yeah, and that's where you were at, but I'm backing up just a little bit because this wasn't church associated, but this is kind of where, like, I don't know, it was a dark time for me, so kind of that happiness was just like destroyed.
Yeah.
My father passed away while we were still in Indiana, and my mother became our dependent, so I was her guardian for a little bit right after, while her permanent guardian was getting ready. So here we were in this teeny tiny apartment. Anyway, so he passed away, and here I have to kind of now be the leader of our family, so that was hard. And then
we had our third baby. Mm-hmm. We were getting ready to move across the country.
Yeah, so we have
kind of an atomic bomb in all of our stability.
Everything.
And then you were starting to have some mental health.
Well, I
concerns.
think it was just kind of the perfect storm. Is, I was mourning a parent. I was now a guardian of another parent. I had a newborn baby. We were leaving everything that was comfortable and happy and wonderful about our lives, and I mean, there was just, and then postpartum anyway, so it was just like the perfect bomb in my life, in my mental health, in my family life, in just everything wiped out within a couple of year period. And so again, that didn't have anything to do with questioning Mormonism, but I mean, if we move to a place that Mormonism is no longer filling that need socially, culturally, religiously, spiritually, then I mean, we had to go somewhere. We had to seek something.
Yeah.
So that wasn't necessarily me questioning, but I certainly wasn't happy. I was trying to make Florida, Indiana in any aspect, and it just wasn't working. Any of it.
Yeah, and so then I started questioning more, because I started going through my faith crisis around the time we moved, mm-hmm. and it became really hard, because I was called as an elders quorum president. I was, we were in this new situation, and here I am having these questions, like, okay, is any of this actually real? And then bringing you in on it, because we talk about everything.
Yeah.
And I would kind of tiptoe or like dip my toe into it a little bit to kind of gauge where she was.
Yeah.
And I know.
Yeah. So that's where, I mean, all these years it was never, hey, did you ever wonder if maybe the church isn't true? It just wasn't that. And I don't think you were trying to be sneaky about it. It was just, hey, I read this thing or I heard this thing, and
it was a lot of me trying to kind of process it myself and not have to necessarily burden her on it, because right. I was also hearing stories of people that would kind of open up to their spouse, and all of a sudden that their marriage would fall apart, and so I was like, no, I don't want that.
Right. Come to find out, they had married their spouse, yes, for love, but also
they married the church.
Yeah.
What
that person represented. and we didn't want to find out at that point if that was us.
So,
I
yeah,
didn't think it was.
But yeah, so as I was questioning,
Mm-hmm.
like what was most important to you then? Was it me? Was it your marriage or was it the church?
Well, so before that question even came to the forefront, so kind of when I really realized that you were going through something was the Noah's Ark discussion. Isn't that funny? That's the thing that broke it open.
I don't know if you remember, several years back there was that really bad Russell Crowe movie about Noah's Ark.
2014 or 15? It was fairly soon after we moved
Yeah,
here.
and so we decided to sit down and watch this movie because, why not? And at the beginning of the movie, like, there's this little text blurb or whatever, and I said, "That's wrong." And you said, "What do you mean?" So we paused the movie.
But I thought you had brought up a Noah's Ark question
I did.
a few times.
Yeah.
And then
That's right,
when
that's
it
right.
came up, then I had processed it enough.
Yeah.
So he had asked me this Noah's Ark question, or did you
think the Noah's Ark was a real thing?
right, or something, like something just so...
Something I figured was safe. and it kind of threw you for a loop because
Yeah.
you'd never thought to question that story at all
Right, it's
before,
Noah's
right?
Ark. It's like the first thing that you learn in primary that as
Animals and a boat.
But yeah, I mean, of course it's there. It's been there from day one. Of course it's real because it's no, it just didn't occur to me that would ever be in question. Not that was such an important story necessarily. It's just the foundational one. That's the one you start with in primary. Anyway, for some reason when he said it that way, like, did it ever occur to you that, or, I don't remember the wording, but what it came down to was like, do you realize that Noah's Ark didn't happen or something like that? And I was like, wait, what? Because in my mind, if he was asking that question, he was basically saying, yeah, it adds up real quick. The Bible isn't true. If the Bible isn't true, then, I mean, quick dominoes knocked down, right? It's a long way to the next, but not, anyway. So I was flabbergasted, and that to me was like, oh no, my husband's losing it. He's gonna leave the church. That my life is already falling apart. This is it just, and so I think I pretty much just shut that down pretty quick. That was one of the first times we ever just didn't discuss something.
Well, and it was one of those things where I was kind of dipping my toe in, like I said, to gauge her reaction, and because it was so forceful, I was like, okay, I know I can't really, yeah. But then, she had a chance to process it. We sat down to watch this movie, and I said, that's wrong. And you're like, okay, what does that mean? So we paused it, and we had like an hour and a half conversation.
I think it was longer. It had to be like 2. It was
a long conversation.
Very long. I don't think we even got to the movie.
We did get to the movie.
Eventually, but it was so late at that point. But anyway, so we had this conversation. I was like, okay, what do you mean? Like, logic it out for me. Because that's how our conversations had always been. It's not just emotional or random. Like, give me your thought process. And so we talked it out, and he explained, and I asked questions, and okay, do you mean this? And anyway, it was just that finally I was like, okay, I see what you're saying. It makes sense to me. I don't know if I said right then if I agree or not, but it wasn't this, it didn't feel like a bombshell anymore. We had a discussion, and it made sense, and not all the dominoes needed to be knocked down. It was just kind of a different view on this one story.
Yeah.
So it was okay.
So my faith crisis kind of proceeded, and we would have like these conversations throughout. Sometimes they'd be like these difficult sorts of things where, kind of like the first Noah's Ark thing. Mm-hmm. Other times, but you kind of knew I was kind of on this certain path of at least giving up a literal belief in things.
Right, and we didn't have the verbiage of a faith crisis at that point. It was just, so the Masked Mormon sees things differently than other people, but he can explain it to me. It's not just, oh, I don't believe I don't know, it was just each question, let's talk about this. How do we feel about God? I kind of see God in this sense. I mean, and everybody kind of has a different interpretation of God or different things. So it just kind of became that. It's not, I don't believe, it's, I just see this thing differently than we have been told our whole life.
Yeah.
There's a different way to look at it, and that still felt safe. We were certainly having way better discussions than we were at anything church, especially Sunday school. But it didn't, some of the questions, I think there was really only one other question that I just stopped immediately because it was just too wrong. But I think every other we discussed to some extent.
What
and
question was that?
No, I don't want to share this question. It was just so off the wall, and it didn't apply to anything else. It was just more of a, hey, I heard this story in this one way, what do you think? And I was like, no, I can't. It just doesn't even, anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, my deconstruction kind of continued, and you were, like, I remember you kind of having, it's like, okay, do I choose the church or do I choose my marriage? And you had a specific moment where you said, I choose the marriage.
And I mean, that was my own personal experience that I then shared with you.
And then that made me feel safe.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, I don't have to hide things. Like, I don't necessarily have to bring her into every single thing that I learn.
Right.
But I don't have to feel afraid that, if I let something slip, that my marriage is over, or that, it's going to nuke our whole relationship. And so,
I mean, and at that point we were also not just having doctrinal conversations, it was
even cultural.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, church as leadership and whatnot. And because we were experiencing this really not awesome ward, we weren't getting fulfillment from it. It wasn't happy. So, that was kind of breaking down some of my illusions of what the church was going to be like for the rest of our lives. And I didn't want that, and it was kind of like, well, if I'm not going to get this satisfaction or fulfillment here, then something has to happen. It's not like I had another choice or something, but something wasn't right.
Yeah.
Again, and so I wasn't questioning, but I knew I wasn't happy. That kind of thing. But you were far enough along that I knew you were for sure questioning, and it hadn't affected our daily routine, but I knew you weren't there anymore. And so that was at that point like, okay, if this is the direction he's going, am I going to stay with him, or am I going to stay with the church and we'll just cut him at some point? That's a little more brutal than it really was, but I mean, and that's what it came down to, right? Am I going to stay with the church and find somebody else eventually or whatever, but it was like, no, I chose him for him. It wasn't, I maybe thought some of these qualities, anyway.
Yeah.
But it felt good. It felt good to make that choice.
And I think it helped us be closer as well. Like, there were definitely other things where, when we started questioning tithing, or, how we paid tithing even.
That was probably one of the first ones.
Yeah.
And that didn't feel like, that wasn't a foundational belief for me. So.
Yeah, so we went from paying tithing on gross to doing our surplus, before eventually we just stopped paying altogether. But, and then I know there was word of wisdom stuff that, coffee and even alcohol, where
that was further. But those are big ones because they're like
very cultural touchstones.
Well, but they're do things.
Yeah.
They're not belief things.
Yeah.
So we could talk about belief all we wanted without actually changing our lifestyle very much. But when you get the word of wisdom, it's very active, I guess.
Yeah.
But the first one was definitely coffee, and you did that one way first. And I was like, well, I mean, I don't care if you make coffee at home or whatever, but I'm not ready for that, or I'll taste some of yours, and I'm dipping. Like, I was very slow at everything.
I led her down to hell bit by bit.
I mean, if you want an example of how that is, that's exactly what happened.
But I do remember, so I would bring up doctrinal things to you and even cultural things sometimes, and it didn't seem like that was really what was important to you. Like for me, like I was definitely very much a validity Mormon. Like the doctrine had to be true in order for the church to be true. But for you, it seemed like it was more utility. Like the church was like this world kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what kind of broke it for you was totally different than what broke it for me. Like for me, it was doctrine. But what broke it for you?
Well, before I answer that, like, I thought we could continue how we were forever. And we even heard stories about that. Of, you know, okay, well, I can be that person where I don't believe everything or it doesn't all work, but I want to stay in this family. I want to stay in this world. I just want to keep the status quo, I guess, for lack of a better... Nothing needed to change. I can believe whatever I believe, and we can still make it work. It still works, right? Did I have my break before or after COVID? During
Before.
COVID? Before COVID. Okay. Because before COVID, we had already stopped going to sacrament meeting.
No, to fast and testimony.
Oh, okay. Because that's just but I think we stopped going more because we didn't want the girls hearing that and believing that that is actually what a testimony was. Because there were just all kinds of crazy stories and lost key miracles and, you know, false missionary experiences where I befriended this person in order for them to join the church. And you're just very fake. And having what they would call spiritual experiences that were just emotional experiences. And we didn't want the girls to get confused about that, about what a testimony actually is. So is that for fast and testimony, that was, I felt it was more for them, besides the fact that it's uncomfortable and not fun.
Yeah.
But so are you sure I had it before COVID?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you know what time here?
No, but it was after one of those Mormons.
Yeah.
So there was a Mormon stories that kind of came on that really affected me, but I shared it with her.
And he had been listening to lots of podcasts and lots of stories, and I had joined occasionally and listened, but they just don't really jive with me as far as something I want to listen to all the time. So I was like, hey, these are interesting, but I would prefer you to listen to them, and then we just discuss them. That was just easiest. And so he listened to this one about a sister missionary, two sister missionaries who had served their mission. I think it was a foreign mission, right? And they were assaulted on their mission and raped. Assaulted and raped on their mission, which is horrible in and of itself. But I think even beyond that, the thing that cracked me was that they received no help from the mission field, from the church, or any kind of mental health repair, hospital, just complete denial. It didn't happen. Get over it. Pray some more. I mean, just the worst that you could possibly imagine reaction to anyone getting assaulted. And that broke me because, first, I had something similar, something bad happen in my past, and so I was relating to that. I had been on a mission, and to me, I thought the church always had my back. No matter what happened, they will care for me. The church as a whole, not just the ward, bringing meals for babies and anything like that. I'm talking about the church as Christ is the head, the prophet, you would be taken care of. So the fact that this woman went through a horrible experience in similar circumstances that I had been in, and then not been backed up or cared for or embraced or anything, was just shattering. That's just when it all fell apart. We had our shelf, we had things on there. My shelf could handle all that and be fine. I don't think I was doing mental gymnastics by that point, but I was fine with things. But that's, like, not just the shelf shattered, but my world shattered. Because, I mean, if the church isn't going to back us up, if we're not truly a family, if we're not, then what?
What's the point?
What the hell is the point? That is just, that's wrong on so many levels that I just couldn't handle it. And when I say shattered, like, I was in the room in tears, crying, sobbing, hysterical almost, which that doesn't happen to me very often. And I was just in disbelief and was like this, like, just couldn't even find words. It was just so, I was like, okay, well, that's it. I wasn't ready to give up culturally, because again, it fell back onto the things that were important to me for going and being a part of a church. Was they were our family because we don't have any others, and I love giving service. I love helping and being involved in that way, and so I wanted those two things to stay in.
Yeah.
And then COVID.
And that kind of broke a lot of the habits anyway. And so we just kind of renegotiated how we just view the church kind of as a whole.
Yeah.
Like, we'll still attend from time to time because...
Well, and see, even all that was gradual because
Yeah.
COVID was, we have some high-risk kids, and so we didn't go to church for like almost 2 years, like, period. Nothing. And then when we...
Glorious.
It was really wonderful. And then when we did start going back, we're like, well, we don't get anything out of sacrament meeting anyway, and it's just like entertaining kids or whatnot, and the talks are ridiculous. And had we given our last talks before COVID?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because my last talk was the one. Yeah.
I didn't do anything as earth-shattering as the Masked Mormon's talks, but I did try and make sure that mine were deeper and thought-provoking and not the norm. Not nearly as eloquent. But they certainly still didn't fit in the norm of talks. And so I was like, well, what is sacrament? I mean, sacrament isn't doing anything for us, so let's not do that. I think we even stopped going to Sunday school.
Yeah, I stopped going to Sunday school long before that.
Mm-hmm. And I would go and just sit out in or I would go and see how long I could deal with it and then join him. Because it would just, the teachers were just, we wanted to have deeper and more thought-provoking discussions. So either the teacher wouldn't call on us when we would raise our hand, and we weren't trying to be controversial, we were just trying to have a better discussion. But it ended up being, I don't think it was ever fights or arguments in Sunday school, but it was just rejection of any other thoughts,
Yeah.
I guess. And so why attend if we're not getting anything from it and we can't contribute anything to it, so why go there? And for a time, we were still getting stuff out of priesthood and Relief Society, but then we had kind of some ward divisions and changes, and then, like, it's just all old people who are set in their ways in Relief Society, and so I got called into the presidency, and so I just kind of sit there and ignore, but then occasionally I'll be like, wait, what? I gotta something to say about that. But, I mean, how long can we hold on to that? If we're, and then, so, and the family that we're close to in the church is moving away. We're not getting much out of any Sunday experience. The girls aren't getting much out of any Sunday experience. They're really fighting us now. And the service that we're doing is so lame. I'm more involved in the schools and the community and getting much more out of that and having far stronger relationships and friendships outside of the church, so I just don't know how much longer we're going to last.
So do you blame me?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
My fault, I guess.
But, sometimes I have conversations with my sisters in my head. It's not creepy, it's just I'm grown accustomed to defending myself before it even comes up. And so my sisters have posed this question to me before, but I finally came up with a good answer. They've asked, do you think the Masked Mormon has influenced you or pushed these beliefs on you or influenced your beliefs? And your knee-jerk reaction is like, no, of course I'm autonomous, I can make my own decisions. But of course he has. He's my mate, he's my partner. Of course he has influenced my life. Has your partner not influenced your life? Talking to my sisters, like, you've changed some of your beliefs because of your partner, you've changed some lifestyles because of your partner. So yeah, of course he has. Of course we've changed some of our political thinking. You've changed some of your political thinking because of your partner and hearing a different view. So yeah, I'll own that. Of course he has influenced me. And I would like to think I have influenced him. But but that makes sense, right? Of course our lives are intertwined. Of course we would impact in that way. But it was worth it to me to be flexible and work with that within the church, within that belief system, until that belief system just shattered. And I don't think I never felt it was your intent to do that with anything that you shared. You have graciously acknowledged that you were the reason that the rug got pulled out from under me. But I think it was just anything else. You found a story that paralleled many things in my life and thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
And then without any real indication of how much that would shatter everything.
Yeah. Well, I think that gets us through most of the questions. Thank you so much for coming on, Masked Mistress. Hopefully everybody enjoyed your experiences and
view on things.
Yeah, but
I would like to say that I only accept positive comments, but I am always curious with questions, like what did we leave out, or what did we share that you have a question about? Because we're accustomed to talking about it this way and to each other, and maybe covering some common ground that we're just always accustomed to, but I am curious how other people perceive that.
Yeah.
But again, if you're going to be nasty about it, just don't even bother. I don't have the bandwidth for that. So
fortunately, like, even the commenters who disagree with what I do, they've been very
tactful,
kind and whatnot as well. And so, but yeah, that being said, again, I'm so glad you came on. I love you so much.
Aww, so sweet.
But if you like what I do here, please like and subscribe. And like you said, if you have any questions for us, please leave a comment and we'll try to answer it as best we can. And if you like having the Masked Mistress on, maybe we'll have her on again for something else. And yeah, so yeah, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time.
Bye.